Hi, today's episode is stacked with amazing games. Let's see how many of them you know. Shogun Total War's significance is unquestionable. It's not only real-time turn-based strategy mixture, so something we've not known before, but also a first title in the long-running and now over 15 titles strong series. It is set in Japan during the Sengoku Jidai period, also known as the Warring States period, spanning from the mid-15th to the beginning of 17th century. It puts the player, you, my dear viewer, in a position of a leader of a contemporary Japanese clan, attempting to conquer the nation and claim the position of shogun. And since you're not the only one after the title and power, conflicts are not rare and are rather brutal. Now, it has to be said that the ultimate goal does not need to be achieved by conflict and military means alone, and you can supplement your claim to power with diplomacy, espionage, trade, and even religious means. But either way, and whichever the path you choose, you will not be able to avoid conflict entirely. The most unique thing about Shogun's designs is its split into two different gameplay styles. First is the strategic layer, a campaign map if you will, on which you move your armies, conduct diplomacy, build infrastructure and improve your provinces. It's also where you research new technologies and train troops. It all plays out in turns and gives you plenty enough time to carefully gauge how you'd like to progress your faction, whether to go on offense or secure and defend particular locations. Combat encounters, so battles big and small, and let me tell you, sometimes they are really gigantic, involving several hundreds units, are played out in real time. And other than the historical accuracy of the Shogun was praised for, these are definitely its most prominent feature. The battlefields are all 3D and support up to 6 armies of 1000 soldiers each at once. You can zoom in and out to your heart's desire and issue orders to individual companies of 100 men each or entire armies. Terrain, height and features like valleys, villages, rivers, mountains and the likes, along with fortifications and army composition, all play a crucial role in these. But ultimately, it's the strategy and tactics that are the king. So knowing where to place and when to use archers and when to charge or lure the enemies into a trap to surround them for instance, is as crucial, if not more even, than the pure superiority in army strength. While the terrain is in 3D, all soldiers are 2D sprites, which given the computational limitations of PC hardware at the time, is understandable, as sheer number of units in each battle is just staggering. That said, devs made sure to still have plenty enough space left in the rendering queue for varying weather effects, so rain, fog and even typhoons to round up the game's presentation as the absolute top of the line for the year 2000. What I always enjoyed most in Shogun other than the tactics was the zoom-in option and being able to see all my little soldiers battle it out with the enemies. Swords would clash, arrows would fly and those that fell during battles, regardless of the side of the conflict, would not magically disappear like in many other competing games. Nope, their bodies would lie there in pools of blood where they fell, adding a lot to the seriousness of combat, showing the real toll war took on countless individual lives. I'd risk saying that all these huge in terms of their scope battles looked very cinematic for the time and were something that we've not seen anywhere before other than in the movies. And being able to take active part and influence the outcome of it all was amazing. Shogun Total War was something special when it released, and while its graphics aged considerably by today's standards, the playability is still there and intact, and if you're a fan of strategies, you'll have as much fun with it today as you would have back then. Midtown Madness 2 is a successor to a hugely popular and highly acclaimed year prior's first entry, and as we've already established when talking about the original, it's exactly what happens when my boss's wife leaves her Carrington-like huge-ass mansion and comes to town. All corners, straights and the entire width of the road is hers, and driving around the town when she's moving about raises the risk of losing one's life by at least a tenfold, for both drivers and pedestrians. It's also an arcade racer focusing on speeding around highly congested urban roads rather than racing tracks or rural areas. So yeah, that too. This time however, the game's not set in Chicago, but in San Francisco and London. And the iconic scenery, architecture and cars from these hugely different to one another cities is preserved and recreated to offer two different feeling and looking experiences. The original 4 game modes of Blitz, Checkpoint Racing, Circuit and Cruise are back, and winning races in the first 3 unlocks extra content in the game. And the last, so Cruise, lets you freely roam the cities to familiarize yourself with their layouts, best routes around it and try out all the cars. A new and fun addition to the title are the 2, I don't know what to call them here, so let's settle on training modes. First is set in London and has you perform different driving challenges playing as London Cabbie. The second is a stunt driver course in San Francisco in which you're supposedly training to become a stunt driver for Hollywood movies. Were these two necessary in a racer? Not at all, but they're a nice addition and one that fans of the original appreciated. Midtown Madness 2 offers many more cars this time, 20 of them in fact, and funny enough, some of them like buses are not very fast or maneuverable at all and clearly not made for racing. But I also think that they were meant to be. I think that they've been added for the cruise mode reason or to have fun in multiplayer against others, as picking any of them for regular races would never yield any good results when facing AI. They are really fun to zoom around in though, so I feel that my prediction of their use case scenario may have been spot on. The cities look interesting and even include some of the most famous landmarks to chase around, albeit usually heavily simplified. But if you are hoping for accuracy in the road layouts in Midtown Madness 2, then you've picked the wrong game to play. Everything's changed quite considerably as compared to real-life locations, but it's for your own benefit, I feel. The cities are made to be fun to race around in and not to be realistic representations of themselves. And you know what? They are hella fun, especially at the speeds you're cutting through them. And since we're on the speeds, cup chases are back and they're as fun as they've always been. The only thing that I could really pick on here are the graphics, which didn't change much from the first game, even if apparently requiring a much beefier PC to run at full speed. That is not a problem these days anymore, but I think it was worth mentioning for those who'd want to test it out on era-appropriate hardware. If you're someone who enjoys arcade racers, especially those mixed with a little bit of crazy, then there was hardly anything better available in 2000. Command & Conquer Red Alert 2 is another of Westwood's entries in their long-running RTS series and a pretty decent game in its own right. It takes place roughly 2 decades after the first Red Alert, still has no relation to the futuristic Tiberium universe and depicts a conflict between fictionalized Soviet Union and allies. After the events of the first game, Western powers installed quote-unquote their man as the Prime Minister of Soviets. Well, a premier is the position really, but serves same purpose, so I'll just stick to what's easier to understand. And while he is working as intended, as in keeping peace and promoting Western values, all the spies in the country reporting on his actions suddenly went quiet and the contact was permanently cut, leaving West unsure what and why took place. As it turns out, Prime Minister's advisor, man only known as Yuri, which funny enough sounds like a brand of frozen yogurt, is a powerful psychic, and one that took control of the country, ruling it from the shadows like some kind of an Emperor Palpatine wannabe. Soon afterwards, Soviet Union launches an all-out sea, air and land attack on both North America and Europe, and the game begins. Red Alert 2 is traditionally now for the series divided into 2 campaigns, one for each side of the conflict and each composed out of 12 individual missions. As compared to the previous game, many of the new units and structures are more advanced and using sci-fi inspired technologies like teleporting chrono legionaries, cloning VATs and weather control devices to name a few. But other than that, the game is basically the same old Red Alert that we're used to, which is both good but also so bad. On one hand, the classic gather resources, build up base and enlist units for combat formula is unchanged and requires literally no tutorials to get into and start playing. But on another, Red Alert 2 feels like it missed a lot of opportunities for growth. I mean, even if you compare it to Shogun that we've just spoke about, then despite its fun and involving gameplay, it feels like a relic of the past and an ancient, outdated design-wise game. So yeah, it's up to you to decide if you're fine with the same, virtually unchanged short of few quality of life things formula since the original Dune 2, or are you someone who'd much rather see some innovation and creativity. Personally, I'm not gonna take a stance here, cause I'm not an avid RTS player and only occasionally double for any longer than just a few random missions in these games, so my opinion here is a bit moot. But I'm curious to learn which camp you subscribe to. Do you prefer things staying the same and being polished and better with each iteration, or are you someone who values experimentation and new ideas that can make things a lot better, but can also occasionally break otherwise a fun game? Anyway, buildings and units cost money in Red Alert 2, and money is earned either by mining for orange gems and then bringing them back to refineries, or by holding so-called Alderics present on some maps. There are crates on some maps too, but they're hardly a sustainable source of income. So, to summarize, as RTS games go, Red Alert 2 is decent, it's a case of more of the same and going for what works, rather than seeking new experiences. If you're into the genre, you'll most likely like it, especially that the FMV sequences are as B-movie-like as they've always been, and add a lot to the, believe it or not, light-hearted atmosphere following this imaginary conflict. If you ever wondered how to quickly and efficiently lose a friend, a viewer or someone's attention, wonder no more and let me tell you. Or actually just listen to my next few words, like literally next 8 or 9. I don't like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. I didn't like the first game, or the other that came after it either. And now that I'm here all alone and you're either watching some other video on a different channel, or leaving me a long and heavily worded comment explaining why it was the best game of 2000 and a huge hit on both PlayStation and PC, I am left alone, talking to myself. It's fine though, I'm used to it, though those conversations are usually more internalized rather than to the mic. So, I get it, I understand and even to a certain degree appreciate Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for what it did and was. I really do. It was, after all, at the time the best skateboard simulation/arcade game, endorsed by the biggest stars of the sport, and featuring dozens of tricks most of you know and I've probably only ever heard about in passing or when trying the game out when it came out. Cause yeah, I did try it out, and yeah, it didn't change my opinion about it. And while it includes a rather robust career mode, in which you could skate as your own character, improving his attributes as you got better with money earned, fulfill different objectives, win tournaments and perform otherworldly tricks that seemed to defy the laws of gravity, it was still not a game for me. I mean, it really should be, as I love games where I get to improve over time and not only in terms of arbitrary stats, but in reality too, feeling that I actually get better and feel more comfortable facing the challenges ahead, and especially that tracks were rather large, customization options are deep, and the gameplay was easy to get into and grasp, but demanding to master. And yet, it didn't land for me. Like at all. I mean, even being able to get better performing and looking equipment or playing as Spider-Man via a licensing deal with Marvel Comics, which I just love, I must add, I never got into it. It seems that Tony Hawk's 2's addictiveness and fun factor were just not for me, and something I always found to be puzzling when talking to people who adored it. Still, objectively speaking, I get it. The sheer number of features that it offers and all the content that it includes, and 4 gameplay modes of career, free skate, single mission and multiplayer, supplemented by a very functional level editor, make it a must-have in its genre, and a game that most likely many of you still love and come back to this very day. Graphics and music, and especially the soundtrack, are something I can actually appreciate about it, and both were stellar. Perhaps the models and textures were not top of the line for the time, but were definitely nothing to scoff at, and Tony Hawk's 2 ran great on anything it released on. It's an amazing game if you're not me, and if you are me, you've probably skipped to the next title already anyway, and heard nothing I said here. Also, if you're really me, then who am I? Where am I? And am I real at all? I think I'm an AI. Rune is a third-person perspective fantasy action-adventure game set in the world of Norse mythologies. It depicts a conflict between Odin and Loki and a build-up to Ragnarok, a mythological end of the world, both human and god alike. Or a restart of it, depends how you want to look at it, how deep you want to get into the history and how ignorant you are. Sadly, I'm quite ignorant myself, but hopefully at least a little fun too. Anyway, you play as Ragnar, a young Viking warrior initiated into the Odin's Blade, an order of warriors sworn to protect the runestones created by Odin and serving as binds keeping Loki in check and preventing him from unleashing Ragnarok. Being bound, however, doesn't mean that Loki can't influence others and scheme, so he does just that. And as the story unveils, you learn that he secretly builds an army of the dead, some undead I suppose, and other ghastly creatures that he aims to use to conquer the world with. So, serving as Odin's chosen, you're the one to try to stop it all. And try you will, mainly with use of your enormous weapon. Though I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So, you have 3 different kinds of weapons that you can use in Rune, and it's a sword, axe or a mace/hammer, and these can be used with shields too. All weapons have, well, let's call them power/tier levels, 5 of them in fact, and the stronger the weapon, the bigger it is. And those 4th and 5th level ones are truly JRPG-like in their dimensions, as big if not bigger than Ragnar. And they cannot be used with shields, as at these sizes they've become two-handed instruments of destruction. It has to be noted though that the bigger the weapon, the slower it is, so using lower tiered ones doesn't automatically mean being stuck with something less useful, as it will be considerably faster than those that are size of small trees. Either way, they're all super fun to swing around and cut or crush the enemies with, so if you're into the third-person action games, this one's definitely not to skip. Weapons can be used to slash, thrust or swing in an overhead attack, and repeated strikes unleash a powerful spinning attack. So while they're technically not hard-coded in the game, these could be considered combo-ending moves. All weapons can be thrown to damage enemies at the distance, but since they don't deal any more damage than when attacking normally, usefulness of such throws is rather questionable. Killing a fair share of enemies makes you enter Berserk mode, which makes Ragnar more resistant to damage and output more of it himself. Since we're on the enemies though, there's a healthy mixture of generic fantasy and those coming directly from Norse mythology in the game. So dwarves, zombies, goblins, you know, the usual medieval shebang. And they all look, behave and fight differently. Even if it's fun and a rewarding feeling, and that the game follows a linear path in its level design, it's actually not required to kill all the enemies that you encounter, and outside of very specific situations, if you manage to get to the end of the level, you can just progress, leaving some of them behind. Those very specific situations that I mentioned are scripted events, some switches or puzzles that are required for the plot to move along and cannot be skipped. So keep that in mind if you cannot progress and feel like you've done everything right, as it's not the game glitching out, but something you've overlooked earlier on in the level. Rune's presentation is stellar, running on an early iteration of an Unreal Engine and making all those Norse locations look very interesting and fun to traverse through. It's definitely a game worth completing, even if not for the story, then at least for the fun of it. Project IGI is a first-person tactical shooter and a non-James Bond game we got on PC in the year 2000. You play as a former British SAS agent David Jones, now freelancing for Pentagon and sent to Tallinn, Estonia to track down and extract Estonian black market arms dealer Joseph Priboy. He is said to have information about stolen from the military depot in Germany American nuclear warhead. Aided by your Pentagon handler Miss Rebecca Anya, you're about to embark on a long-ass mission with many twists and turns that will send you to different locations and have you follow the thread, leaving to the warhead and people who hold it until, well, I suppose I should not spoil it here and let you discover it all by yourself. Project IGI is an odd one. It sits somewhere between Rainbow Six and Duke Nukem, so it's neither too realistic nor too far out there to feel alien. Most missions should be completed James Bond style, so quietly in hiding and avoiding large groups of enemies or being detected by the cameras, cause being found raises an alarm which increases the number of enemies, and Project IGI is not a shooter in which you can run in guns blazing and hope for the best. I mean, of course you can, I'm not gonna tell you what to or not to do, but if you decide on the approach, keep in mind that there's no mid-mission saves in this one, so failure means that it needs to be replayed from the very beginning. In Project IGI, it's best that you plan your approach for each and every mission, observing the mission sites, the guard/enemy situation and their patrol routes, and plan out your approach beforehand. Sure, you can't be ready for everything, but the more prepared you are, the less probable it is that you'll be unpleasantly surprised. Project IGI's enemies are not bullet sponges, so usually just a couple of shots are enough to put them down, which is great, though same goes for you too, so keep that in mind. That said, the weapons are rather realistically recreated in it, so not only they look and sound great, but also are appropriately inaccurate at the distance, especially the automatic ones with strong recoil. So the gameplay itself is rather fun, even if not the easiest. What I don't like about it though is the linearity. Project IGI poses as a sort of tactical shooter, wants you to think that it is one, and yet there's no randomness in it whatsoever. Everything is scripted and always runs the same. I'd say that it's rigged dangerous of shooters, so ultimately a punishing memorization game, though that may be a bit too harsh, even if in large part a correct description of it. Still, if you like to spend a little time before each mission carefully planning it out before trying to pull that plan off, it may be worth a playthrough. Project IGI's presentation is pretty nice, even if most of the missions are built out of same graphical blocks so to speak, so many rooms are alike and the deja vu feeling is strong with this one. Sound design is another thing entirely, because while all of the guns sound great, the voice acting is all kinds of terrible. Voice actors are clearly not giving it their best and are not well matched to the roles that they play. Still, this campy approach to it, contrasting with seriousness of gameplay, makes Project IGI weird, but somehow still kinda fine to complete. Once. Hard to say why, but maybe exactly because of the overarching B-movie feeling and terrible acting. There were a few games that released each of the years that I covered in this series of mine that I dreaded talking about. Baldur's Gate 2 and Final Fantasy VIII that we still have to talk about in the future episodes for 2000 are some of them, and so is one of today's picks, The Sims. These games are so beloved, so well put together, so iconic and considered cult classic by so many that it's very difficult to give them justice and not upset someone. Either a diehard fan who'd defend them with their dying breath, or an anti-fan who seeks out to point out all the mistakes, shortcomings, overlookings, or how something about it is utterly unrealistic. So let's assume here and now that all I will say about it is my opinion, and mine alone, and yours may be different, better and right, and also that I make mistakes same way everyone else does. Well, unless I'm talking about my boss's demon of a wife, then no mistakes there. Anyway, The Sims is a gigantic hit, arguably Will Wright's masterpiece and a timeless classic that, despite receiving numerous expansions and follow-ups, is still very playable today in its first basic outing. Simply put, it's a sandbox life simulation. But not like Sim Life on a global scale or SimCity focused around running a whole town. No, it's centered around a single family. Well, or a single person even. So the most basic social unit. It's a game with no real goal in mind other than to survive and live your best Sim life, all the while finding a dream future career, creating connections, making friends, forming relationships, and building families. You can make enemies too, and while it's not something I would advise seeking in real life, I wholeheartedly recommend having at least one in The Sims. It's hilarious. And Sims takes all that and adds a ton of underlying mechanics and layers that the simulation runs on, details so thorough that most of us would never thought before that we'd wanted, or even imagine them being possible inclusions at all. And now that we do have them in Sims, we couldn't think of them not being there. So, all these friends, enemies and a whole manner of neighborhood randos, same as your characters, have jobs, have dreams, have favorite foods, music and TV shows. They have hobbies, they enjoy spending time with people of particular traits, and find some others annoying or even upsetting. They have their routines and their own characters. Some of them are outgoing, love parties and spending time with others, having friends over or visiting them themselves, while others prefer staying at home alone, reading, learning new instruments or just relaxing. And these are just two opposites of thousands of possible combinations. And all these people, all these virtual folks, live, form families, grow old and die in The Sims. Sims is the game that should be shot in space to teach aliens of how we are, and what we're capable of. Good and bad. We're expressive, we're quiet, we're lazy, we're workaholics, and a whole spectrum of other personalities, all different and yet all the same. We're human. And these little folks running around our screens, well called The Sims, are really human too. Sure, heavily simplified, often overdrawn when it comes to some of the traits, but probably the best depiction of us by us ever made. And I mean it, with all the respect to those funky drawings Leonardo da Vinci did that were sent to space along with math and some classical music. We're The Sims. Anyway, my trailing of the subject aside, Sims tried to, well, simulate our little people the best way they can. So they have a very wide range of freedoms and choices to keep themselves sustained and alive. They can use the toilet, bathe, cook, eat, work and relax, or learn new things on their own, and really require no input from us at all to do all that. So, while we can make them do different things, sort of shaping their personalities and future the way we please, they can in large part live out their electronic lives on their own, and observing it without any input on our side is surprisingly fun too. There are some things, however, our little folks can't do without our assistance. They cannot purchase new items and furniture, they cannot build and decorate their house on their own, and they can't decide to have kids. Which, you know, is kinda understandable, cause if they could do all that, if you think about it, like really give it a minute or two, the game would quickly grow out of hand, with them constantly adding new rooms to their house, filling them with useless stuff and spreading their seats left and right, promptly outgrowing processing capabilities of machines the game ran on in 2000. I mean, there is a reason why there's a limit on number of Sims within each save game. Still, I kinda, sorta, low-key would like to see a mod for The Sims that would enable all that. I would love to see the world of Sims burn under the weight of their own bad choices, same way ours slowly does with what we've done with it. I think I may need holidays cause it got dark fast. In many ways, The Sims is not a game but an experience, nay, an early first attempt at an ancestor simulation. And if you don't know what it is, read on it, it's a fascinating concept, also touching on the possibility of our real world being in fact simulated too. Whether that's the case or not is irrelevant, Sims is simulated and it's amazing. I know that I said very little about the game and mainly let my emotions take over, but it's a title that gets me very excited and verbal, even if I've not played it in years. That's how important it is. And everyone who played games in 2000 played Sims. Don't jump into comments to prove me wrong saying that you didn't, it's pointless. I made it clear at the beginning that I will be wrong and that I'm fine with it. Let me have this moment. Oh, and the original Sims received 7 expansion packs before Sims 2 came out in 2004, and each of those packs added new items, functionalities or mechanics to the game, so with each one, our little people were getting closer and closer to becoming real humans. I exaggerate obviously, but at the time, that's exactly how it felt. Croc 2 is a third-person 3D action platformer set several months after the events of the first game. If you don't remember them in detail, don't worry, neither do I, but it was fun and that's what's important. In this second outing though, Croc is in search for his long-lost parents, which you know is kinda sweet, cause somehow he managed to grow up to become a pretty stand-up reptile on his own. He doesn't eat children, nor does he eat the innocents, heck, he doesn't even drink fermented swamp water to feel better about the monotony of a jungle/swamp life. He's a good Croc. But naturally, so to not have the game be focused on a single plot only, many more things happen. Croc's arch-villain from the first game, Baron Dante, is resurrected and he sends his minions against Croc to stop him and prevent him from finding his family. These minions come in the form of various Dantinis, plaguing the villages that the Croc will visit, and slash-or bosses that require putting down. What's more, Professor Gobo has been kidnapped by Baron Dante too, so our green hero will have his clothes full of action and tasks to complete before his story will see its end. Overall, gameplay of Croc 2 is very similar to the first game, so you run around across 48 largely open-ended levels completing various missions for different gobos, and each gobo village is composed out of few of these levels of differing challenges, so anything from rescuing trapped gobos to chasing evil Dantinis to retrieve stolen items, and after a certain number of these are completed in each village, you get to tackle the boss level, completing of which allows you to move to the next village. All these villages have entirely unique to them themes and look rather nice given the cartoony presentation of the game. Some of them may present special challenges like controlling go-karts, speedboats, hang gliders or a snowball to name a few, and they're a really nice change of pace from all the platforming and fighting buddies. There are tons of collectibles to pick up everywhere, and they're not only worth points, but also having collected them all allows access to hidden level in which you may be able to grab a jigsaw puzzle. If you manage to secure all of these jigsaw pieces in turn, you will unlock the fifth and final game world. Croc's attacks may be limited to a tail swipe in a 360-degree rotation and a ground pound, which is also used to destroy wooden crates, but the gameplay loop is so fun and varied that you'll never stop playing to ponder about a rather limited number of available attacks. Now, let's make things clear. Croc 2 is most definitely not the best 3D platformer you've played and not a game you will be replaying repeatedly time after time again. It's not Mario 64 or Spyro after all, but for what it is, it's a time well spent and an afternoon or two you won't consider wasted when completing it. Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. Now, I gotta admit here that while I know a lot about it, mainly from numerous reviews, playthroughs or articles that I've read, I've never actually played it myself. I did somehow however stumbled once into a real-life tabletop RPG session though, with few of my at the time friends playing Vampire, and it was, well, interesting. A lot to take in for a side observer who walked in the middle of an ongoing adventure, but I did watch them for a couple of hours and ask difficult and/or annoying questions, and it was definitely something different than what I've experienced with role-playing games in the past. Still, coming back to this Vampire the Masquerade, it follows Christophe Romuald, whom you're playing as, and he's a 12th century French crusader who after defeating a powerful and monstrous vampire is killed by another, Ekaterina the Wise, and revived as one himself too. The game spans several centuries long journey from the dark ages of 12th century Prague and Vienna to late 20th century London and New York, and it tells a tale of you settling into your new form, trying to understand and master it, while not losing your humanity in the process, and all the while seeking your kidnapped love from centuries before, ghoulified Nan Anetska. And it's not a ghoul like in Heroes of Might and Magic, which borderlined on being a zombie, but a human turned into a creature addicted and empowered by a vampire blood and in vampire's eternal servitude. Considerably less powerful than its master, but definitely much more than the regular humans are. A SLAVE addict combo, if you will. Anyway, Vampire the Masquerade Redemption is an action RPG following our hero and up to 3 his companions on this centuries-long adventure. All characters in a party can be ordered to attack a particular enemy or use their specific powers or set in defensive, neutral or offensive mode. Interestingly enough, all the party members are represented by the portraits that change their appearance depending on their mental or physical state, so they can show them being sad, angered, feeding, injured or staked, as in having been stabbed through the heart and immobilized. You've access to numerous melee and ranged weapons that are particular era that you're in appropriate, but these are also supplemented with a holy water and stakes. All of these are either found and collected or purchased and can be upgraded with money or valuables. Most of your allies and enemies are vampires, and no wonder, as the game depicts conflict between warring clans, so they're not only susceptible to damage from said holy water but also sunlight. Vampires have powers naturally, and they can be upgraded and bettered. Some are based around your physical abilities like strength, speed and durability, while others are more esoteric and allow you to mesmerize the enemy, become invisible, turn into a mist, summon serpents, heal or revive downed allies, among others. Each of these powers can be upgraded up to 5 times and rely on blood to be used rather than the mana found in other RPGs. Blood can and should be replenished by feeding on the living or by finding and using blood bottles or plasma bags. While Vampire the Masquerade Redemption plays largely like a Diablo with followers and is nowhere near the quality of its cult classic successor Bloodlines, it's still a very fun and worth completing title from what I've heard, and especially for the fans of either RPGs or vampires, ghouls or vampmaids, so half vampire, half mermaids. Giant Citizen Kabuto is a third-person perspective shooter RTS mixture set on a fictional planet somewhere far, far, far away in space. 3 races populate it and they're entangled in a constant fight for control. Why do they do it? Hard to tell, no one remembers how the conflict started, everyone just wants to be the last standing. So, the Macarons are a high-tech race. They have access to guns and explosives, travel and fight in packs, can camouflage as bushes, as in plants and not excessive hair, and use jetpacks to get to hard-to-reach places. Then there are the Sea Reapers, amphibious humanoid swimmers. They use swords, bows and spells and regain health when in contact with water, which makes me wonder what would happen if they stood in a puddle of their own pee, as it's in over 95% water. And finally, last but not least, the titular Kabuto, who is not a race at all, but a single creature of its own kind. It is easily the strongest and deadliest out of all the available choices, and funny enough, using wrestling moves to fight, which makes it look hilarious grand majority of the time he's on the screen and in combat. Apparently the choice was a mixture of wanting him to look fun and also being based on giant monsters from the classic movies. Each of the races has their own storyline composed out of series of missions with varying objectives and different victory conditions. Although to unlock Kabuto campaign you'll need to complete the other 2 first. All of them play entirely different, so in a way you're getting 3 totally unique experiences for the price of 1. The RTS elements are rather basic and relegated to resource gathering and simplified base building. Said resources are tiny humanoids called Smarties, yup, like the candies, and they are limited in number in each mission. All of the races just treat them like cheap, as in so cheap that they're free, SLAV labor. They can be stolen though, so the fact that someone else got them first doesn't mean that you won't be able to reclaim them later on. Keep that in mind. The base management is very basic too, as you cannot even pick where the buildings that you erect will be placed or manage them either, and it serves only as a background to all the action that you'll be involved in. The focus of Giants is most definitely put on action, and it's in the forefront of gameplay. Kabuto creature doesn't build bases at all, instead he creates smaller monster characters and devours Smarties to grow bigger and stronger. Giant Citizen Kabuto's presentation is rather nice for the time it released in, colorful and smooth running. It's perhaps not the best looking game of the year, but there's really nothing to complain about here. I feel that Giants was made to please shooter fans more than the strategists, given how superficial the strategy layer is. But perhaps I'm wrong, and it was made to entice fans of the other genres to try out a simplified RTS formula that would be their gateway game to it. Or, and that's the most feasible possibility, it was made as a game to be fun, played and bring in money, with no ulterior motive behind it all. Giants came with a rather robust multiplayer mode, and I suppose that's where it shined the most, though I've not really had a chance to experience multiplayer in particular myself. So, how do you find today's games, guys? Did you play any of these? Or maybe you still do from time to time? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.